Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of the Operational Technology Cybersecurity Expert Panel Forum 2022, organized by the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. My name is Melissa Hiak. We are very pleased to have attendees joining us for this important event to Singapore and global OT cybersecurity communities in person here at SANS Convention Center, as well as virtually across the time zones. We thank you for your support for the OTCEP Forum 2022. Now, in yesterday's presentations and discussions, we learned in greater detail about the latest ICS malware, Pipedream, and the threat potential of such malware to Singapore and the world. We also got a lesson in rebalancing our approach to the risk equation to accord due weightage to the consequences side of the risk equation vis-a-vis likelihood. We also explored together the incident response framework for embedded systems, which combines engineering forensics and digital forensics. And we received clarity on what the top secure PLC coding practices are. And during the panel discussions, we heard very candid conversations, passionate debate about the approach to a strong cybersecurity environment, which indicated to me that even in such important matters, and perhaps especially in such important matters, there is no one single approach to it. And it also brought to light for me that in the work that you do, which is, in my eyes, like superhero work, unlike the superheroes we watch in movies and in fiction, your job need not be a lonely one, nor should it be a job in silo. That sometimes action speaks louder than words, and communication is key. For this morning's technical conversation, our panel members will discuss how to combine engineering concepts with security methodology for a better secured OT system. So without further ado, let me invite our panel members on stage. Ms. Sarah Flukes, CTO of Admaricia GmbH. Mr. Marco Ayala, Director of ICS Cybersecurity and Sector Lead at 1898 & Company. Mr. Daniel Ehrenreich, Consultant and Lecturer, Secure Communications and Control Experts, or SCCE. And Dr. Ong Chen Hui, Assistant Chief Executive, BizTech Group, IMDA, and Covering Director at Trust Tech Engineering. And moderating this conversation is Mr. Steve Lam, Partner at Ernst & Young Advisory Services for Cybersecurity Advisory Services. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have burning questions for our speakers, please feel free to pose your questions via Slido by scanning the QR code on the screen. And for guests on site, we would love to hear your voices. The microphones are located along the aisle. And now over to Mr. Lam.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first session of today's agenda. I hope everyone had a chance to get a good rest last night after hearing about all the scary stuff yesterday. So today, the intention is to dive deeper, one layer, and to have the technical conversations on what can be done pragmatically in the field when it comes to securing OT systems. When someone first starts off in the OT environment, the first thing that they notice, either you're from a IT background coming into OT to do cybersecurity, or you're an OT person learning about cybersecurity in the OT environment for the first time. The first kind of thing that everyone notices is that IT systems are very different from OT and IT systems, right? And the way it's done is that IT systems are typically built with a lifespan of anything from 5 to 10 years, right? OT systems are built with generally a lot longer lifespans, right? They can be 20, 30 years. And these OT systems are originally designed to operate on a flat network, right? And the overriding kind of imperative there is for stuff to work. So a lot of attackers, threat actors, they take advantage of this flat network, of these legacy systems, of how OT systems are configured to work. And there have been a lot of real-life cases, we heard some yesterday, on how it can be used to disrupt or even destroy the network and the process that the network enables. On the other hand, we then have defenders which are put into this legacy network, this legacy infrastructure, stuff that have been built for 30 years before the word cybersecurity even existed, right? And defenders are scrambling to protect these networks against today's threats. These systems are susceptible to emerging threat vectors, some that we know of today, some that we will know of tomorrow, right? We also have standardization issues, especially when there's pressure from the businesses to kind of integrate these two networks together because, and I come from a time when it was acceptable to generate monthly reports in a OT network and basically export that to the business. But these days, a monthly report is generally viewed as not acceptable, right? And even some businesses are even demanding close to real-time updates of resource consumption within the OT network. So we're also dealing with standardization issues, interoperability issues between the various systems. At the same time, we need to level up our capabilities to make sure the environment is secured and to keep everything running. So with that, right, maybe we can kind of kick off with a first question while audience, please, we have Slido up, so please submit your questions. We have this distinguished panel of experts here that you can ask your questions to, but maybe I'll start off the discussions first. First question, how does this IT and OT convergence, how does it actually affect engineering design from a security perspective, right? And maybe, can have Sarah give her views first.
Okay, well, I'm only expecting Daniel to tune in on the term of OT conversions later, so I'll leave that to him. But what I think is important, we've been talking a lot about how you need to translate between IT and OT and that people have different terminologies. I think what's even more important than terminologies, though, is different approaches to how you solve problems. At least that's what I learned. I mean, I'm from the OT side originally. When I came freshly out of university, I learned if you have a problem in engineering, you analyze it, maybe you have a diagram or model of something, you have a structured way to a solution, you have different solutions, and then you have a solution. In IT, at least what I learned, and maybe that's a bit controversial now, but people have a problem, and then they have a huge list of best practices and just pick one. And that's something that's probably too simplified, but it's a problem for acceptance, IT cybersecurity acceptance for OT engineers, because they're just used to way more systematic and maybe even also to have more time to find solutions than it's normal in IT. I think that's one of the biggest cultural approach differences I experience, at least.
Right, thanks, Sarah. Marco?
Good morning, everybody. Let's see, IT, OT, the great divide, the great convergence, the great divergence in many aspects. But I come from the automation and instrumentation side, so I'm biased out of the gate. I apologize, but I can tell you that when you think of IT, you typically think of traditional enterprise systems and you think of help desk requests. When you're talking about control systems or instrumentation out in the field or even the operational technology, which really didn't become coined until I think it was around 2013, 2014, where OT became a thing. And so there's no really help desk for that. It's more of a work ticket design strategy and working with your automation folks and with your plant computing. Some companies call it plant computing, where they interface with the IT side. This discussion around the convergence piece of it, I think, is important, especially with today's systems, where the digitalization front has taken us far to the left, all the while the right-hand side has been trying to catch up with the safety implications of connectivity. You know, I've been on this journey for well over 25 years as an automation professional, but about 18 years as a security person. And how I got into this field was not by choice, but by incident. Working as an asset owner in the chemical industry, also being the process historian owner for not just plant sites, but also for the US side, working with IT security. We learned a lot of things together in that journey. I learned that IT security is a very, very well trained and educated in what they do. And I learned that their landscape is much different than my landscape. And again, you did mention flat networks, which is true to some point. We came from very proprietary networks to much more networked devices that we have today. I remember it was right at Y2K where we started getting boxes, workstations that had Ethernet, RJ45 connectors. And I remember the IT security person saying, one day this will all be ITs. And he was talking about our control system space. He was talking about everything from our quad logs, our APACs, even the early Delta V systems that were 10-base T. And I remember that, and I was thinking that will never happen. And here we are today with security implications. And if you've noticed, one of the things that I've seen, or at least I've witnessed, is that where we've come today is that you would think from the IT security standpoint, being the golden standard of security, staying up to date, patched, life cycle, we're still having incidents. We're still having zero-day exploits. We're still having vulnerabilities. You hear about this weekly. You turn on the news, cybersecurity coming in through the enterprise. And so we always hear about how OT or the ICS is very antiquated, very legacy, very old school thinking. I was also once called barbaric for the type of systems that we have in the field, and there is some truth to that. We have to understand that our systems are completely different from a standpoint of reliability, safety. I think Daniel talked about that yesterday, is paramount. I think he called it SPR. Call it what you will. At the end of the day, it's all about risk management. So I think the side of where IT and OT have actually worked really well together is understanding the professionalism and the need for both sides. We talk about having our systems, I think what was the word that you used, standardization. Standardization is great, but in the world of connectivity that we have, that also allows for cyber actors to have this horizontal attack surface, this horizontal plane of attack surface. So as you're rolling out Emerson Delta Vs or Siemens PCS7 or whatever the system of choice may be, as you start to articulate that and deploy that out across your whole plant infrastructure, whether that's 20 sites or 400 sites, many of the clients that I work with have, that can also be detrimental in the deployment because of that horizontal attack surface. So I can see where the IT and OT side come together, and I think Joel and I were talking the other day, and we were talking about divergence, where there should be some level of demarcation and separation, understanding where that is in your infrastructure, both on the IT side and the OT side is very important. Knowing where to do it, knowing how to do it, having some type of protocol in place to do so is paramount in today's world, especially how we're interconnected. And for those that are dealing with enterprise SCADA, I feel for you because a lot of that has so many intricate details that if you bring any one aspect of it down, you could have something like a colonial in a sense where you don't have maybe direct impact to operations, but indirect impact to operations to where you have to make the call or make the decision to shut down. And that's not an easy call to make. So with that said, I'll let it go.
Thank you, Sarah, for introduction and showing my direction. So I do believe that the major achievement of this conference can be that we will correctly speak about the term IT-OT convergence. Because what is convergence? Convergence among people, among networks, among data, about the type of components. So I would like to repeat what I said yesterday. In the IT zone, we are talking about confidential integrity availability, which I highly respect. For industrial operations, we are talking about SRP, safety, reliability, and productivity, which is very much different. So how we are going to solve this problem? I feel bad because like the train already left the station and so many people are talking about IT-OT convergence as like it is normal. No, it is not. IT and OT data must converge somewhere in the architecture, maybe in the SOC, maybe in some areas in the SIM, okay? And IT and OT networks must be securely interconnected. So let's not use the word converged. Let's use the word securely interconnected, meaning wherever it's applicable, use a data diode. Wherever it's you need a bidirectional session, you can use a next generation firewall or a DMZ or a jump host server, whatever you feel it's right. Furthermore, another differentiation between the IT and the industrial activity is that people who are involved with industrial control system must understand the industrial process which is happening at the plant. This is the main reason why the gap between IT and ICS people happened. This is the reason why they are often, in many places, not drink coffee together. Because IT people believe that they know what to do. Industrial control people believe that first understand the process. Can IT people understand the process? Obviously, if they learn this profession a couple of years and they are intelligent people, obviously they will do. So I think that without using too many words, I think that this is my view, and I see it as a goal for this conference. If not for this one, hopefully the next one.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, so maybe a little bit about how I first got into OT, right? So I was first in cybersecurity and defense. And then we started looking at OT cybersecurity. But over my career, really, it's not just about OT cybersecurity, it's really about cybersecurity in a lot of the emerging areas, whether that is in mobile networks, whether that's in automotive and all that. So it's about extension of cybersecurity principles to a lot of these specialized domains. So we talk a lot about IT and OT convergence. We talk about, like, I think Marco was talking about, there's sometimes mentioned that OT can be a bit slower compared to IT in terms of the speeds in which the systems are upgraded. But perhaps I wanted to give another perspective as well, right? Coming from having to work in a lot of different emerging areas and then trying to apply security principles to it. One thing that I felt very strongly every time I touch OT and ICS systems is that, to me, because of the clarity of the operational technology in the business, so it's when it comes to talking about risk, and when it comes to actually engaging the C-suites and the boards, it's actually a lot easier to explain the business case. It's actually a lot easier to explain what is the impact when there's going to be downtime, when there's going to be, when safety is going to be compromised. So in terms of describing risk in the OT environment, it actually, to me, is actually a lot clearer. And I mean, if you compare it to trying to describe, okay, so what happens if you are a bit slower in patching your Windows systems, that impact can be very tough to describe, right? But in the OT environment, it tends to be a lot easier. And I think this is something that really should be leveraged on more by the security teams, whether it starts from IT or start from the OT space. Okay, so I do kind of agree with what Daniel is saying. When we talk about convergence, I think convergence can mean many different things at different levels, right? So at the systems and at the networks level, while there is an increased pressure for digital transformation, for predictive maintenance and all that, and these can seem very much like IT systems kind of concepts. At the end of the day, we have to look at where that convergence actually lies. Probably good that the OT networks needs to have that priority around availability, around integrity, and bear in mind that the security policies for the OT environment is probably must follow the kind of principles that the control systems actually needs to follow. So it will be a slightly different set of priorities compared to the IT systems side, right? And whether that affects the way we design the data architecture, whether that affects the way how we actually design the network architecture, I do think that that may evolve over time for greenfield systems, but for brownfield systems, really, I think we should be looking at how to securely connect between the two systems. But from the incident response and the workflow side, I must say that I do see quite a bit of divergence, or rather a segregation between the two. Now, on the OT side, you're not likely to get the number of alerts that you typically see in the IT environment. So a typical IT SOC can see massive amounts of alerts. And if we apply that kind of same mindset to the OT environment and we put a detection in there and we expect to see alerts, I think a lot of times we're probably not going to see anything from the OT environment simply because a lot of it is machine-to-machine kind of communications, right? So we're not going to expect to see a lot of changes. There are not as many human kind of interactions inside that can trigger some of these alerts. So I think coming from the velocity and volume of alerts that can come out from the two environments, we should definitely expect that the IT environment is going to have a lot more of it. And then the question is, if something does really happen in the OT environment, how can we ensure that we actually know about it in a timely manner? I think this part of being able to resolve and between the kind of workflows against the context of the two different environments is something that I think has not really been solved as well.
Right, thanks Chen Hui. So I think we heard a lot on this topic, right? Standardization leads to the increased horizontal attack surface. We heard about, when we talk about IT-OT convergence, is such a buzzword in the industry now that the whole meaning become confusing. What does that mean to an engineering concept angle? We also heard about SRP, safety, reliability, productivity being important, and of course, how you set up that OT security operations center, how you monitor those threats. Now, there's a question from the audience in the same vein of conversation, right? Could convergence, in the panelist's opinion, also mean the ability to use a whole suite of security tools that are already present in the IT environment, for example, privilege access management, Active Directory, or is the expectation that, because they are practical or security requirements like air gap, for example, right, that requires a whole new suite of tools when we implement cybersecurity within the OT environment. I think another question that is also from the audience is, do we believe that the word convergence is meant to include data, or is it just a technology sharing definition? So maybe we can start off with Daniel.
Thank you. I'm afraid that whoever asked this question still did not get the point. Sorry. Because when we speak about IT and OT, and we want to do it in a secure way, we need to design the OT, deploy it, commission it, absolutely separately from the IT. So you build the power plant, you build the water sewage plant separately. Design, deploy, commission. Same for the IT. Design, deploy, commission. These are two separate systems. Finally, they can be securely interconnected for only two purposes: for improving productivity, and the second, reducing the risk of failures and cost of maintenance. There are no other reasons to connect between the network, okay? Because the OT system must be independently, safely, reliable, operating. The IT zone in the organization, the buyers, the managers, those who are tracking the production, they need to receive data. But how receive the data? Securely transferred. Data diode, DMZ, next generation firewall, what is right? There is almost no reason why all IT people should enter to the OT zone to do any action. There is another point that it generates a concern, is the remote access. How we do remote access? Okay, so remote access should be done securely, for a limited time, under supervision, and immediately blocked after the session is completed. So once we understand these principles, we don't need to talk about if can OT system use the Active Directory in the IT zone. Obviously not. Once you try to do it, you are bridging among the networks, and you immediately create a path for attackers. So let's try and understand the principles. And this is part of the training that IT and OT people must receive. Understand the principles. Once they understand the principles, I think that these questions will no longer be raised.
Maybe directly to that, I think there's an important addition that we need to make. I agree that we need to have two separate, for example, for Active Directories, for a lot of purposes, it probably makes sense to separate them. But there's another issue in the question, and I think it's important to stress that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on technologies. I mean, of course you use Active Directory in OT. Of course you use privileged access management in OT. Of course you can use all these technologies. You definitely, I think that's an IT rule that I really think is important. Don't reinvent the wheel, don't reinvent your own cryptography, don't reinvent your own code, don't Google it and use what other people use, right? So that's a really important security principle, and we should also adhere to in OT. So of course, do use Active Directory in OT. Just consider making it a separate Active Directory, maybe. Or just consider in privileged access management, consider that maybe some of the principles you used in IT may not be feasible in OT. It may be that something like always having locked screens, like multi-factor authentication, like having accounts tied to persons may not be feasible in a control room because there are different requirements, there are different operational requirements, but the principles and technologies below that definitely do use them in OT. There's no reason not to. After all, a lot of OT systems are just Windows machines, right?
Thanks.
So I think the tools themselves, I agree, reuse the tools as much as possible. But at the same time, I also think that tools themselves don't guarantee good security. And it's really about which tools actually applies in what kind of situations and what are the threats that we're trying to mitigate here, right? So, yes, we can use privileged access management, we can use Active Directory in the OT environment, and we may not even need to connect them if we don't want to. You can have two separate sets. But I think the issue is also that in the OT environment, there are some connections and some systems, because of the operating context, they are always on, right? So even if you do have privileged access management, the question is you're not authenticating actively each time someone needs to log in, because the machine to machine always have the connections on. So where I think we need to be very clear when we do privileged access management, exactly what is it that we want to mitigate, what is that threat, and whether in the specific OT environment, we are actually moving the needle when we're putting that set of tools in, because the tools themselves may not actually move the needle. And I think we need to be very clear what's the security context.
Marco?
So for the audience that's out there and in the virtual audience as well, I'd like to say, raise your hand if you've ever seen a plant trip or a unit go down because of using IT enterprise tools in a control system space. I see many hands starting to raise. It's okay, you could raise your hands. It has happened, and it does happen. I can tell you that the convergence, a lot of folks talk about the OT and the IT side of it and the tool sets that are used, but I can tell you many of the vendors have created their own tools that are authorized, verified, and certified to run in these environments. I do agree with the doctor that regarding some of these things could also give false indicators. I mean, running Nessus or some tool from the IT enterprise side, even with SCADA plugins on a system that's 7 years old that's going to tell you you've got vulnerabilities, I could have saved you a lot of time and effort on that. Of course, it's going to have vulnerabilities. Of course, it's going to have a lot of things that are going to not be in place. You're going to get a pretty report. What are you going to do next? Understanding these things that are great. I came from an older side of where we weren't even using domains or Active Directory inside of control systems. I still see to this day on offshore rigs where we're using work groups. And honestly, there is that level of segmentation and separation to where the Active Directory and these domains, keeping them separate, have helped or increased their security posture. It's not perfect. So when it gets down to the tools side of it, I'm a big fan of using tools, but vetting them first, working with the vendor. Many of the vendors here that are here today or that are dialed in virtually have tool sets that can help identify your systems before you start just connecting everything else. So yeah, access management, those are key pieces. I think the panel's done a good job in discussing that.
Yeah, great discussion there. I think we heard a lot on can we use IT tools in OT systems, and I think Daniel here has made it pretty explicit that yes, you can use those tools, but do not in any situation connect them together because that compromises the security of the system. And we also heard that tools are just tools, right? You have to use it with a correct purpose in mind, and sometimes how you would use those tools in a IT environment might be very different from the use cases in the OT environment. And I think Chen Hui brought up a good point of some engineering workstations are just designed to be left open 24/7, right? And if you were to implement privilege management on that, or if you were just to set a simple thing like a screen timeout on that, it immediately breaks the purpose of having that workstation in place. So great discussion. I think we can still take some questions from the audience. I thought this was a particularly interesting question, which is as much as OT can benefit from the IT way of handling cybersecurity, the whole, not reinventing the wheel, right? Are there learnings from strategies used to secure OT that can be used to advance cybersecurity in an IT environment?
I'll just start because that's one of my favorite questions always, right? We're always talking about how OT can learn from IT and must learn from IT, and we forget that the OT has an history equally as long or longer than IT. So just because OT engineers do things differently doesn't mean that they're dumb, doesn't mean that they don't have a clue what they're doing. From an IT perspective, it often looks like that these are old, limited systems that simply can't do all the fancy stuff that IT people are used to. And I think it's important to overcome that idea because there are systems that are highly specialized for the exact purpose that they are used for. And that's probably I get to the question in a minute, but the important is when IT people come to OT, that was also a question that was posed, that they don't just learn new skills, but they also learn a mindset. I like to think of a mindset of like you have a big cabinet, a big cupboard of drawers, and every new piece of information you put into one drawer, right? You have that sorted for you, for yourself. And now if you're an IT person and you come to OT, just throw out your entire drawer and build a new one, right? So if you have all the knowledge about IT components and you think you know how Active Directory works, how protocols work, what machines are for, what Windows does, just throw that out and be prepared to learn that anew. Be prepared to look at simple OT components and really understand what they're made for and why before you criticize anything about them. And there's also a learning, and that's to the question here. I think that IT people can definitely take from OT because OT components, different from IT, are, as I said, they're really made for one purpose, and they're made for doing that one purpose really well. There's so many OT engineers which are so proud of all their PLCs that have been running for 25 years without going down for a single day. Imagine that as an IT person, having a system without a single day of downtime in 25 years. And in building those systems, keeping them to the minimum of things they need to do is a strength. It's not a weakness, right? So it's something in OT, we don't always have to do everything just because we can. It's okay to leave out things sometimes. And it's okay to realize that also is a cybersecurity strategy, right? Just leaving things out, having the courage to say, I don't need that feature, is a cybersecurity strategy on its own that works actually way better in OT than in IT because components are just simpler. But that's also something that we can, it has its limitations, of course, because in IT people, systems are different and they have to have many different purposes. But if you can, the most important thing is not adding security controls, but first leaving anything out that you don't need, because then you don't need any security controls on top anymore. And that's way more elegant than having way more controls added on top and stacked upon each other. So that's one of my most important learnings that I try to convey to IT people when we talk about security. So cybersecurity for OT doesn't always have to be more difficult. Sometimes it's just simpler, and that's actually a strength.
Thanks, Sarah.
I think I mentioned just now, I think one of the things that I felt is really a lot clearer in the OT environment is what is the impact if there is going to be a cybersecurity incident. The fact that you can articulate that when the production line goes down, what that actually means for the business, that kind of clarity and that kind of focus, I think really benefits the kind of risk discussions that we can have, and something that perhaps if we can have that kind of clarity in the IT environment, I think that will really help us prioritize what actually needs to be done for IT as well.
Thanks.
No doubt that IT cybersecurity is a few steps advanced compared to OT cybersecurity. No doubt, no need to discuss it, so this is true. Furthermore, I also see already a trend in organizations that the OT cybersecurity people will somehow report to the IT security people, which I can always accept because hierarchical reporting must be assured. So what IT people can learn from OT, I think that the most important message they can learn, appreciate the opinion and the knowledge of the OT experts, which they acquired for many years. The strategy, the philosophy, what is right, what is wrong, what can you do and what you cannot do. Just appreciate it and start friendly collaboration and all will be fine.
Yeah, one of the things that I think IT security, and you're right, they do well, that IT can learn from the operational side is the difference between management of change and change management. There's a big difference. One is the human-based and one is technology-based. In the control system side, it is very important that anything that we do, that we roll out, that we test, we verify, we validate before we push these out to our control systems and even our safety instrumented systems, because of the things and the stuff that's at stake from the operations side of it and the impacts and the consequences. Where in the IT front, we've seen a lot of automation. We've seen where patches, updates, fixes get rolled out either on a constant basis. Sometimes these rollouts don't effectively go well, so you're rolling back. You don't have that luxury within an OT space. You have to do your due diligence in testing. Yes, you do need to have a rollout plan or a backup plan, but the point here is that if we're going to really have a true discussion between the differences and some of the things we could learn from each other, is that OT can definitely learn from the IT InfoSec that's very well versed and very well advanced. Again, still not perfect, but where the IT can learn from the OT side is the differences between the MOCs and change management.
Just one more word I would like to add, very important. In the OT zone, we not do patching and not do update on a weekly basis. Furthermore, we are not going to touch the OT system unless we are sure that the safety is assured after the change. Very, very critical. And I'm brave enough to say that if you do not have the time and resources and the measures to assure that the safety level will remain at least the same as it was before, or hopefully higher, then don't touch the OT operation. Maybe deploy some complementing compensating measures, but definitely not do any change, because if a mistake happens, then the plant may go down for weeks.
Thanks. Yep. So there's definitely a lot of things that OT can benefit from the IT way of handling, similarly to how OT can benefit from IT, right? And we spoke about some of that. One of it which comes to mind to me is, of course, playbooks, right? IT speaks of playbooks as though it's a very new thing. Do we develop playbooks for incident response? When actually, in OT, those are called operating manuals, those are called SOPs, and they have been there, 30 years ago, right? So there's definitely a lot of things that we can all learn from each other. I see that there's a question from the audience. Yes.
Yeah, good morning. I'd like to ask the panelists' views on, we talk about learning from between IT and OT, right? Cross-learning and the benefits of each strength. Now, one of the concepts mentioned in IEC 62443 is security level, right? And to me, I'm from this functional safety background, and so Mark, we talk about the S84, for example, right? So you have the safety integrity level, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now, in the OT security world, this concept of security level, although it's there, stated in the standard, but in practice, I don't see a lot of application. Now, going to the point where I think Dr. Ong mentioned about, the risk and OT, you can communicate to the board level and, explain to them why certain things are done certain way because there's an impact and so on. So going back to my point about the security level, I would like the views of, in fact, all the panelists, how applicable and what are the challenges of implementing this? Because if you don't know where you are going, right, how are you going to get there? If you don't set the level, you just say that, okay, I've done all these things, these are my best practices, and then you go back to sleep and you think you can sleep. Well, now, when we come to safety instrumented systems, you design something and you're sure that if it's a SIL3, you do the calculations and you prove it. When it comes to security, you don't really do that, as far as I know now. So I'd like your views on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want me to take that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So especially when we're talking about security on the security levels, the 7 foundational requirements that are listed in the standard, There are literally 4, well, so 0 to 4, there's actually 5 security levels. 0 means we're not going to do anything within the 7 foundational requirements, to say even 4 of trying to protect against a well-advanced adversary with lots of funds and lots of time. So those 7 foundational requirements are a checklist within the 62443 3-3 standard. So we have to keep in mind these targets, they're not one-for-one for a safety instrumented system for SIL level requirements. But from a security standpoint, there's 3 caveats to that. Understanding what your target is, which I see a lot of asset owners saying, oh, we want security level target of 3 across all our systems. That's great in theory, but that's why they came out with vectors to be able to do this. It's important to understand that there's not only the security level targets, but you have to understand, is it even capable? So there's the capability side of it, and then whether you can achieve it or not. And we're just not there yet, because we even know that the vendors are still working on systems and technology of the component level in the 4-1 and 4-2 to be able to even meet and achieve the capability side of it. So what we are seeing asset owners do is they're picking a security level target that is achievable, both from the vendor side of it, but also on their own infrastructure side. I've seen different formulations of it, but when we're talking about the standard and the comparisons between them, there is some level of separation there, especially from the safety side of it.
I would like to add here something for the benefits of those who are not familiar with the ISA 62443. There are 2 sets of terminologies, security level 1, 2, 3, 4, which actually should be the first question when we deal with cybersecurity. The term security level is not well defined, because the question is, from whom are you worried? If you are worried from a casual attacker, or from, which is number 1, or from a nation level attacker, which is number 4. When you look at the controls, number 4 has about 99 controls. Number 3, 2, and 1 have about much less control. When we are looking into the other set, the target security level, okay, the achievable security level, these are different things. And please, so that's what I wanted to add. Please don't get confused between these 2 sets of terms, because the target security level is what I want to provide. The achieved security level is what I managed to provide, okay? And there is one more, the security level C, which is the compliance. What is the security level which my device or my solution achieved without complementing and compensating measures? So very important to learn these terms. In order to start to think about 62443 standard. I do encourage you to take a training class, even a short class of 4 to 6 hours already will help you to understand, and then you can learn the standard. Unfortunately, there are 14 sections. I don't know exactly, but probably 1,500 pages, if not more. So very difficult. But if you learn the basics, you will be able to find the right section and act accordingly as much as you can. Not easy.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of go back to one other point. When we're talking about SIL levels and we're talking about 1 out of 2 voting, 2 out of 3 voting, and trying to get into your safety instrumented function or safety function, one of the things that is in a similarity within the security level targets is the zone and conduit structure, or the ZCR, when you're going through your risk assessment side of it. So if you're going to be selecting security level targets, which is part of the 3-2 standard, you would want to do so for each zone and conduit. So just some similarities there.
I think also, to be fair, from a pragmatic point of view, the ISA security levels are really great concept in theory, but I've been seeing many people applying them in practice. Because it's really, if you're saying you need to know what kind of attacker you're going to protect against, well, go around and ask an operator what his opinion is on that one. It's not easy to determine, right? And there are a lot of different ways to, I think the new version of IEC 623-2 does a good job on explaining that there's no one single way to define these security levels. So there are different ways to get there. And what's important is not so much the number that you get in the end, but that you have a good methodology how to reach it, and also from a translation perspective between operators and vendors, that you get at the same table and talk through things, talk through what's really important to you, and then in the end have a number on there. That's okay. It's okay for simplification and for communication, but it's not a principle that's easily just blindly applied from my point of view. No.
Okay, so I think the thing about 62443 is, so there are different kinds of security levels, but I think at the end of the day, it still boils down to, do we know exactly which are the crown jewels? How are you going to create the right security zones so that those zones can be at a higher security level, right? And then we can look at, because it is difficult to localize and to implement some of the principles in 62443. So it does take effort, right? So what are your priorities when it comes to actually hitting the highest security levels for the critical systems? I think, to me, that has always been a bit, that should be the focus. Because if not, if we just jump ahead and say, well, my system is very critical, and we take like, this whole system needs to be critical, and everything there needs to hit a very high security level, I think we may be artificially jacking up what that cost of security actually is. And it also kind of misses the point, which is that we need to be able to identify where the risks actually are, right? So I think that's, to me, that should be the first principle, to actually figure out which parts are the crown jewels, which parts needs to be prioritized, and be at the highest security level.
All right, thank you. So maybe we'll just do one last question on this before we move topics. So background behind this, I do see where this question is coming from, right? And the background behind this is, I think a lot of practitioners, OT, cybersecurity practitioners on the ground, have a lot of challenges in communicating what is even OT to the senior management, to the board, right? And how does it differ from IT? What are the different risk management principles or techniques that can be used? And when you present to them something like the IEC 62443, instinctively, 4 is better than 3, which is better than 2, so, and they just say something like, let's go for 4. Right, same thing if you use the NIST CSF framework, they'll say, yeah, I'm going to go for level 4, right? Why are we not at level 4? Why are we only at level 1? So, is there a common terminology for IT and OT? How does that affect stakeholders' communications on the ground? Is there kind of like a good baseline to talk about this stuff? Not just between the OT and IT colleagues on the ground, but how do we communicate this to senior management, to the board in a way that they can easily digest, understand, and actually provide the necessary funds and resources for us to effect change on the ground?
I would like to remind all of us the standard 27001, 2013, section 5, paragraph 1. How many of the people in the audience know what is written in section 5, paragraph 1? Anyone remember? Okay, let me help you. It says that the CEO, the board of directors, and the top management are responsible for cybersecurity. That's what's written there. Now, when we are coming to this question, once the management realize the top-level management, that they are responsible for cybersecurity, they should take all possible actions, train their people, bring the IT and OT people together, make sure they drink coffee together and they are discussing things, and they will teach each other of what is right, what can be done, and how to secure the position of the top management. Because if cybersecurity is not achieved, then top-level management positions are not achieved. So that's what I would like to point to that question. It's management issue.
Yeah, I can take this from here. The first question is, does terminology for IT and OT affect the stakeholder communication? Yeah, it can and it has. And I think it's just because of the different disciplines. Many of the times that I'm called in is to actually moderate or facilitate discussions in between automation, control, engineering, and safety to either the board or to the IT group, and vice versa. And so the second part of this question, is there a good baseline for the terminology? And yes, there is. So in the 62443, the 1-1, that is a term that covers a lot of the terminology. And I do advise IT security professionals to download the standard, get the standard, become an ISA member. You can view the standard and be able to understand the terminologies that are seen and used in the field. The more that you know in the dialect and dialogue that you have will go a very long way, especially at the control room level and at the maintenance engineering managers level. So keep that in mind. The third piece to this is illustrate with a case study in a specific sector. There's many studies that are out there. The US CERT or US CERT, ICS CERT, DHS for many years, if not over a decade, have published a lot of good working documents on everything from water sector to pipeline sector to even maritime. The United States Coast Guard has got their NAVIC 1-20. There's a lot of good terminology in there that in regards to shipboard systems, to communications, to even propulsion systems. So there's a lot of good stuff that's out there. You just need to know where to ask. And for those that are the automation engineers that are also in the room, please do your duty and your due diligence to learn a lot of the terminologies and buzzwords used in the IT infrastructure and the IT security disciplines. That way, we're all speaking the same language.
Well, honestly, I think terminology is important, and we've been talking so much about that IT and OT people don't understand each other and using different terms. If I'm thinking about if there's any single example where I can say that terminology problems really broke a project or anything, I can say that no. So that's not the issue that is really really giving us trouble. Of course, there are misunderstandings all the time. But as Marco said, there are in between OT. OT is not just a monolithic sector. OT is already highly interdisciplinary. So take security, OT people, and take safety people and controls people, they have a lot of misunderstandings as well. They're used to having these misunderstandings. And that's all things that you can get over with when you talk to each other, honestly. I'm not sure if it really helps if you have a baseline and say, listen, this is our terminology, because people are getting used to terms, and safety people are not going to use the terminology for risk differently just because you have a new baseline. Right? They've just been used to using their terms for like 20 years, and they will continue to use them. And more important than having a common terminology is to understand what the other people says when they say risk, because that's not going to change. And it's not good to change that. We have maybe one example for that is recently in a German standardization body, you know, Germans like to talk about terms a lot. They had a study about the term of risk. And they tried to get all the different definitions of risk into one study and reconcile it. And they completely failed. and was completely predictable that they failed, but they failed 5,000 pages long. So there's really, it's a big, big issue, and it's totally normal for two disciplines who have histories, separate histories, that they have developed separate terminology, and honestly, that's not a problem. We can get over that. We need to talk about things, and we quickly discover when things in terms are different. Just be aware that people could be using terms differently. I think that's the main point.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think we have spent quite a lot of time looking at the risk management. We have spent a bit of time discussing how should IT/OT work together, what kind of convergence, what is convergence, how can we bring in technologies from each side to make things better. Maybe we'll change gears a bit and go more into a technical aspect of things. One very highly upvoted question is this. OT systems typically have a much longer shelf life than IT systems, including cybersecurity products, right? So the chances that your OT system would outlive your cybersecurity product is actually pretty high. As such, most OT systems are running on what would, well, I'll qualify that, right? I'll say what would be considered obsolete in IT hardware and software, or they may be no longer compatible with newer security products, or they could have never been built with security in mind in the first place, right? Are there any suggestions to better integrate IT and OT systems?
This question, the impression from this question is that IT people are excellent people. They are renewing the technology, they are upgrading, they do everything right. And the OT people are, sorry to say that, lazy people. They don't really care about upgrading the technology. They are doing, not doing the work right. That's the impression from this question. I would like to correct that situation. There is a good reason for that OT systems are not renewed every year. There is a good reason for that they are not patched, and we must learn how to secure OT systems without major changes, because changes are not possible, okay? These plants are running 24/7, and in many cases, I'm not shy to say that the operators, the operating organizations, do not have good documentation on the OT deployment. And when we say, if you don't have documentation, you don't know what is going on there, don't touch. So there are reasons for this legacy situation. And we must find a way how to assure security of the SRP, safety, reliability, productivity, okay, in this environment. When you say better integrate, we already discussed it, I'm not going to repeat it, securely interconnected, okay? So instead of integration, secure interconnection. And then everything, so secure the IT operation the best you can, upgrade, patch, update whatever is needed, secure the OT operation separately, and the best you can do it in the environment. Obviously, each plant is different, and then securely interconnected, and then I will be happy.
Awesome. If there are no differing opinions, maybe we can do another question.
Perhaps
sorry, yes.
I wanted to kind of add on. So I think at the end of the day, it's not tools for tools' sake, right? So in the IT world, some of the tools are there for a specific purpose because there are a lot of users in the IT space, systems are upgraded at a certain speed and all that. So there's a certain security context, there's a certain operating context that actually drives the use and the adoption of tools in the IT space. Now, when we look at the OT side of the house, yes, it is true that there are legacy systems, but the legacy systems are there to support a business operations, right? And as long as the business has decided that those systems it's not time to upgrade those systems. And the question is, so how can we actually ensure the security of the systems? And tools are there to help that reasoning of how to actually achieve security. Tools should not be there in and of itself because they're valuable in and of itself. So while it is true that there will be compatibility issues with legacy systems, I do think that if you actually understand some of the OT systems, you understand some of the safeguards that are actually in place, some of the redundancies that are actually in place, then it actually helps you make that decision of, okay, so even if there are no tools, what is it that we can do as compensating controls around it? It does require us to go back to the fundamentals. We can't be quite cookie cutter to say, well, it works in IT, so let's just port everything over to the OT. But I think that is, that's just something that we should do, right? Yeah, so I think the issue is, it's not going to be cookie cutter, but not being cookie cutter may not be a bad thing, because the OT world does work differently. It does have different kinds of safeguards. It does have safety requirements. It does have redundancy in place, and those can be made use of, and those can be understood. And if we can understand them, then we can still provide the level of security. Yeah.
So I guess
to this question.
Yeah, maybe just to close off. So to Daniel's point, maybe it's not the OT people that are lazy. It's the IT cybersecurity people that are lazy because they just expect to drop in something and plug and play like in an IT environment, and you don't have to do anything and it just works, which is definitely not the case in the OT environment. But yeah, quickly moving on. So this is a very popular question. How do we actually deal with insider threats, malicious activity from personnel that have legitimate access to critical components as they can circumvent many secure controls and processes that we have in place?
I think that the question should be significantly broader, because when we are dealing with problems that we are concerned, on one side, we need to worry about internally generated cyber attacks, externally generated cyber attack, and supply chain related cyber attack. And the insider threat can be kind of internal or external, I'm not sure. On the other side, we have another set of concerns, okay? Not only cybersecurity, but faulty device, faulty software, or weather condition like hurricane. Incorrect action by authorized person, very, very important. And finally, cybersecurity. So the question is significantly broader. So when people asking what you are worried about, I'm not going too detailed about insider and this. I said what I'm worried about it, how we assure the operating safety and reliability. Furthermore, I would like to say that we know well that safety cannot be assured without cybersecurity, meaning cybersecurity is a critical precondition to safety. Second, physical perimeter security is critical precondition to cybersecurity. So now you see these three triads that I discussed. And now you see that the insider threat, although it's a major concern, but it's just one of the things. We need to worry about much broader picture in order to be in a position to say our management, we did our best to assure the safe reliability operation of our plant. So the question is significantly broader.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this. The insider threat is real. Malicious activity from personnel, these are things that we worry about all the time, especially in plant environments. I think the piece there is making sure that you have checks and balances. Just like your operators have double lineup to where there's either two humans in the loop double checking to make sure the lineup is correct. I think the same thing is true, especially when we're dealing with critical systems. We need to have some form of check and balance and rotation side of it to where there's not just one person that has full access or keys to the castle. I think there are some really good security controls that I've witnessed large oil and gas companies do to where they're removing a lot of that inherent risk by putting in mechanisms in place. You're never going to stop the insider threat, but by adding those checks and balances, you can limit a lot of that. And there is truth to locking down systems from the physical aspect, but at the same time, especially from the IT security folks, making sure you're looking at the perimeter configurations, making sure that you're looking at detection in depth, protection in depth, where you can within the perimeter or into the para model, just looking at that, or these are all things to be able to trigger and have some form of response on.
I think also there's maybe a positive note where you can use security for something positive, because as Marco said, you have to have more checks and balances, you have to have a second operator at times, and we have a lot of the times for economic reasons, we have cut down on people in the process. We've cut down on operators, control rooms are only operated by one person at night, for example. And if you needed an argument to convince management that you need to reinsert people in a loop and in control rooms, well, here is one, right? Because really the only thing you can do against that, honestly, is to have more checks and balances, to have 4 eyes looking at things, at decisions, instead of only 2 eyes, to have more people that can actually have a feeling for when things are not quite right. Right, you can have a lot of detection and monitoring on a technical side there, but a good operator that has a feeling for something is off here is way better. And then also, if you have these more than one person in a room that can make a decision, that can even be something that makes decisions better, right? So, because every operator, they are human, they fail, they get tired. We once were at a water plant where they cut down on one operator during the night, and we said, okay, and you really stay in the control room all night? And he was like, no, because I have to go feed the fish. We were like, which fish? Yeah, well, there are fish that are indicators for water quality, and they have to be fed twice at night. So the control room was actually left alone twice at night. So things like that are things where it really makes sense to reinsert humans into the loop. And you can use security as a scapegoat, as an argument to do that, as an additional argument, because that really is a situation where there's no better way to solve that than putting more humans in there. Also, humans have antennas for if employees get detached and get disgruntled, right? So that's also something they can have very fine antennas for if their colleague is up to something that's off, right?
Thank you. So next question, which is also very highly upvoted. Much of the focus of the forum have been on recovery detection, incident response, business continuity. From the proactive identification perspective, is penetration testing in OT commonly practiced? Do we scope it just beyond enterprise, DMZ? If pen testing is not commonly done, should it? Yeah, Marco?
Yeah, this is one that I've been working with here recently quite a bit. Obviously, working pen testing a live environment is very dangerous. I will say that usually when we're working with clients on this aspect of it, it's usually during a shutdown turnaround. So there's an outage or some type of ability to do that. But with common swim lanes, and what I mean by swim lanes is having a complete focus. In other words, coming in from a demilitarized zone, knowing what you're going to get to provide evidence and some type of video recording showing that you can get not only to the HMIs, but also to the engineering workstations, but not actually pulling any triggers, but just showing the access to the configuration right at the point of modification. That's all you have to do in a pen test is prove that you're able to slice and dice and be able to get in. You don't need to go and brick a $30,000, $40,000 controller just because you can. So making sure that if you're going to do pen testing, you're going to make sure you're working with the client, there's set expectations, and that the scope is going to be within this constraint. Do not do it on a live running plant. We've turned down asset owners that wanted to do a pen test that refused to actually want to notify the plant manager and also notify engineering, and we said we're not doing that. And so there are companies that are out there that are wanting to do it, but I can tell you that's not a wise idea.
Mario, I think I agree with you very much. The term pen testing is coming from the IT zone, from the IT area. When we speak about OT, penetration testing means that you have a live system and you are allowed to go in and do active scanning, whatever you want, and check all parameters. We should delete this action from our dictionary. If you are buying a new system, or you have a major retrofit, as part of the commissioning of the new system, you are allowed to do pen testing, you are allowed to do whatever you want because the system is still not operational. It's in the staging area. What is very important that after you do the pen testing, you do all the inspection, erase the entire installation, erase the software completely, reinstall the entire system from scratch in order to be ready. Okay, so this is related to pen testing. And we have here three topics, which are the recovery incident response, and BCP. I think that BCP should be an ongoing process for many years to be prepared correctly, do a risk analysis, understand, divide your plant to zones. Don't protect the plant, protect separately, or at least discuss how to protect separately each and every zone and do the BCP accordingly. Incident response is a short action, maybe minutes, what you do when the incident is discovered. The effectiveness of the incident response will be based on the capability of your team, the training, the drills, what you did. So if you did everything right, your incident response will be effective. The goal of the incident response is obviously to stop the attack and reduce and minimize the damage. Damage will happen, but minimize as much as possible. I do believe that the main effort should be directed to recovery. How you bring back the plant to normal operation, maybe not a full operation, at least partial operation, because this will be the pressure on the management. Bring back the plant to normal operation. Obviously, you need to have your goals, whether it's half a day, whether it's the week, depend. And yesterday, Dale gave us a few examples that by correct understanding, you have a better judgment. So, yes, invest in BCP, invest in developing processes for recovery and return to normal operation.
Right, thanks. Thanks, Daniel. Sarah, what do you think about
the question is what you want to achieve with a pen test, right? If you just want management attention, go blow things up to the pen test. If you want to know what you need to do to protect your network, at least do your homework first, do all the basics, otherwise the pen test is just going to turn up all the basics, right? And say, well, if you have a flat network and you do a pen test, what are you going to expect from the pen test, right? Are you getting all the basics up there? If you want, and I think that's what the question is aiming at, you want to identify problems after you have done all your basic homework, then you could do a pen test. It then makes sense to really carefully see what you want to test. It would be probably more a white box test in that time, because you would say, okay, this is what I think we have in place. See if you can break that, if you can still break that, even though we try to really secure it. And what I would always consider is, instead of a pen test or additionally to a pen test, use the brain capacity of your engineers to just analytically, without breaking anything, ask them how they would break your system. Because if you do a pen test, and that's a pen test mostly done by someone externally, they don't have that insider knowledge. But if you're afraid of, for example, insider threats, it makes sense to ask an insider how they would break systems. Because that really turns up, sometimes it turns up additional perspectives and more interesting scenarios for pen testing than actual pen test, right? So it makes sense to really invest in, put your engineers in a room for one day and ask them, give them a bit of context about what you're looking for, what threats could look like, and then get them creative. Because there's always one person sitting in the corner of the room at the end of the day saying, no, I really know how we could hurt ourselves, but I don't tell you. And then you know you've won, right? Because then you really know the scenarios that you're looking for, because you don't need all the different kinds of scenarios. You need the one easiest scenario that an ethiker would go for, the easiest and the one with the most consequences, right? So before you do a pen test, be careful to ask yourself what you want to achieve with that one.
I would like to add just one more piece to this, is that if you're going to consider testing in your control system environment, make sure that you partner with someone that is credible, that understands your space, understands your environment, and in many aspects may have already been into your facilities before, understand your processes and where your impacts may lie to where they could steer clear of that. Because if you just go out and hire any pen tester off the street, you don't know, and I'm just saying this from a risk standpoint, what other back doors or other channels could be introduced into that environment. So be very wise in your selection and choice.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, so I think the question, the way I read the question is also, so exactly what is the pen testing for? If the pen test is really just for compliance reasons, then I think honestly, going to the DMZ, or like what Marco mentioned, making one hop in an offline environment into the OT environment may be sufficient, because it's for compliance reasons, right? However, if we take another perspective to it, that sometimes there will be management requests to make sure that the systems are secure. They need that kind of assurance and all that. And if you need to provide that kind of assurance, that we have done what we can to figure out what are some of the low-lying fruits in order to penetrate the system, right? So if you need to demonstrate to management, then I think the question is, so how do we actually take this chance to also educate the management that a lot of times in OT systems, you don't need like a 0 day to create the kind of impact that you want. Honestly, the OT systems itself provide a lot of functionalities, right? And if you get to the right places in your control network, you will be able to create the kind of impact that you read about in the security incidents in the papers. So I do think that there is a part on how do we actually structure the pen test, whether we go to DMZ, whether we go just to show that access is actually possible. But I think the critical part is also that after access is possible, there has to be the education to management. That once you're able to have access to certain key nodes within the OT systems, actually a lot of things are possible. You don't actually need 0 days or outside pen tester to actually show you that the system can go down.
Yeah, thanks, Zhenghui. I think a question that everyone is very interested in when it comes to pen tests in OT environments would be the second one, which is, you have the enterprise network, you have the DMZ, you then have the control room HMI systems, and then below that you have the PLCs, RTUs, and then below that you have sensors, actuators, so on and so forth, right? So is there a progression this? Or do we start with everything, or do we say, this year we'll do DMZ, next year we'll go down one level and do HMIs? Like, what is what does the industry do when it comes to determining what to pen test or not? So, and that's with a baseline assumption that at least between IT and OT, the organization have felt that they have done a pretty okay job of securing that infrastructure. So we are starting off with that assumption, but then how do you structure that pen test going forward? Like, do you just go day one, we're gonna go all the way down into sensors, actuators?
There are instances where folks want to see how far down you can go. I like a structured approach. I even like a two-tiered approach where the enterprise IT or InfoSec will pen test from the perimeter, from everything from phishing to physical access to try to break into the enterprise. and then get as far down into the network as possible, establish a foothold, bring in team 2 that are specific for control systems, testing with control system engineering aspects, and let them go down as far as possible without any manipulation, but just being able to take evidence down to even asset management systems, which sometimes are at L3 within the Purdue model, in the para model, to where you could also just bypass L2, L1 through L1, and get down to the sensors. And so keep that in mind, is that there's many systems using, whether it's PDM or AMS, that can actually do that additional hop. If you can at least show that you can get down to L2, many of the asset owners know from L2, you own a lot of the systems. I mean, that's just the reality, right?
Okay, awesome. Looks like we are almost out of time. So maybe, I guess for our audience, I could ask each of our panelists, maybe we'll start with you, Sarah, to, with regards to today's conversation around OT-IT convergence, we spoke a bit about risk management, we spoke about penetration testing, a little bit of discussions around BCP, the value of cybersecurity to the actual OT environment, what lessons can we learn from IT, what lessons can we learn from OT. So I guess as the last topic, what are the kind of 2 or 3 takeaways, right, you want to leave the audience with, or the 2 or 3 must-dos that you want to leave the audience with after we end this session?
Okay, I try to go first. What I think is always important when you do secure engineering is actually to get security into your engineering. So that sounds so simple. It's not, because there is already, as we said, highly interdisciplinary field, that's the automation engineering. And anything that can be considered during engineering and first setting up your systems, and that's not just greenfield, because we all know there's a lot of re-engineering being done in all the plants, and there's lots of change management being done in all the plants. If you can get security into that process, you're way ahead of than you can just do when you react and you have already the installed processes. And that's something that's really not easily done. So it's not something to take lightly, because that means first that you need to involve the engineers, the automation engineers. They are no security expert, and they're not going to be security experts. So what we gotta need is we need methods that are straightforward enough and easy enough and fit into their mindsets to include security into their well-known engineering processes. And also what that means is, I think I said that before at the very beginning, what we have is a different approach in problem solving between IT and OT. And what we have is automation engineers that do have a day job. They already have a job to fill, and they already have too little time to fill that. So not to overwhelm them with security, but at the same time get a bit of security to their responsibility anyway. And the important part, what I felt, is you need easy solutions to condense that OT automation engineers' knowledge in a way that it's usable for security. There are 2 things that I've seen that really help doing this. First is getting the OT or the automation engineers to sketch out their most critical functions, getting them to explain and really to draw how they work. Like, what do you do all day? Do you program PLCs? Do you set parameters on your DCS? Do you whatever do you do? Get down to that, explain that, and get drawings to that, because if you ever have an incident and you need to understand certain things and how certain things work together, that really is worth a lot. I have examples where people had these, from a functions perspective, these function-based drawings, and they helped them in an incident. Because, for example, there was an incident where people had to, management said, okay, we have malware in our IT network, and now we need to quickly separate IT from OT. So pull the cord on the firewall between IT and OT. what happens if we do that? And what the people did is they had all these functional drawings and they knew what systems they needed for what purposes, and they said, okay, we go through that, this is going to be affected, this is going to be affected, okay, we can pull the cord. So that's something that just gives you a quick overview and condenses the valuable automation engineers' knowledge into something that IT people can use for their security. And the second perspective is for the automation engineer side, try and condense whatever is the small security decisions. That's what I introduced yesterday before the top 20 talk. The small things that matter security-wise that may not be, that automation engineers may not be aware of. Try and get that into packages that automation engineers can digest and say, okay, if you do security, at least pay attention to these 5 issues because they are really security relevant. If you turn to them and you decide how to configure these 5 things, think about security and think about that there is a security relevant. And that is something I've been introduced with that research project we're doing. That's the 2 things that we're trying to focus on and develop methodologies and libraries for. And that's obviously the things I think matter, because otherwise I wouldn't invest so much time into that one.
Thanks, Sarah. Maybe we do ladies first. Chen Hui.
Okay, so I think perhaps one of the key takeaways is that at the end of the day, this is about enterprise security. So both teams really do need to come together and work together. I think we talked a lot about the differences in terminology, the differences in culture, but at the end of the day, I think the challenge is really how 2 teams can come together and actually localize the security for their environment. And by localizing security, I think we have to look across the entire life cycle of the system, from the way the systems are built, what are the key questions that both sides actually need to ask. So that's on the design side. All the way down to security controls, change management, exactly what is it that you want the OT engineers to be thinking about when they are making the change management. What exactly is it that you want the engineering leaders to actually be thinking about when they are approving procurement, when they are approving change, right? All the way down to in the monitoring. When we're looking at monitoring, exactly how do we actually discuss impact? How do we actually discuss the triage and responses for both sides? And I think that localization, making sure that the 2 teams can work together without a break in the security workflows, I think that's the challenging part. And we really need to get past this notion that there are actually 2 teams, but to think of them as actually 1 team. The other part is that I think I've brought up a few times is we don't use tools for tools' sake. So I agree there are a lot of security tools out there. And honestly, in every IT environment, I think we are probably talking about tens of tools that everybody have to interact with on a day-to-day basis. Not all of them are going to work in the OT space, right? So it does require all of us to come more from the first principles. What are the threats? What are we trying to protect? And whether they actually make sense in the new type of systems that we are talking about in the OT space. Not new as in they are not the latest OS and the latest software, but they are unfamiliar to the traditional IT security teams, right? So it's about, okay, so while they're unfamiliar, it doesn't mean that they are bland. They shouldn't be just evaluated based on which operating system they work on. Right, they do have their own unique features. They do have their own design considerations. They do have their own operational importance. It's about understanding them and about leveraging all of that in order to provide security for the organization. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Chen Hui. Marco?
Oh, just work together, learn together. The factory floor will be very appreciative, more appreciative with the IT security side if the approach is done in a respectable manner. Both sides need to respect each other, but going back to the terminology, learn both sides of the terminology in the coin, and know that cybersecurity, especially in the OT side, is not a one-and-done project. It's a life cycle. You know, you need to assess, develop, implement, and maintain, reassess, and so forth. So work together and make it safe and fun.
Thanks, Marco. Daniel.
Shortly to summarize, understand the risk in every zone of your plant, understand the process, and deploy cyber defense, what is effective and cost effective.
Awesome. Wow, you actually hit it directly on the spot. So awesome. Let me close this off. So I think we have heard a lot, and secured engineering needs to have basically security built in to the DNA, the life cycle, how we do things. It has to be codified into the operating manuals, the SOP. It has to be a daily fact of life for the engineering teams. Between IT and OT, while we talk about convergence, we talk about divergence, we talk about what we can learn from IT, what we can learn from OT, I guess it's important to acknowledge that these two organizations are not competing with each other. They are actually working together to the benefit of the organization. Localization, it's very important to let these two teams thrive within their environments. We also heard about the need to work together and learn together, because obviously there are very good lessons to be learned on both sides. And lastly, of course, is the need to essentially just go back to first principles, understanding the risk, what exactly are we trying to protect ourselves against. I think that applies whether you're in an OT and IT environment. Determine what are your threat vectors, determine what's the best way to identify, to detect that threat, and how to recover if such an incident were to happen. So I had a great time. So thank you very much, as a representative of the audience. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to our panelists.